Hello, today is Wednesday, September 18th, 2024. I'm Tony Mangino from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. I'm joined again today by Keith Cook, my longtime colleague here at TC2, and we're going to continue our discussion on broadband services in the enterprise WAN. As we said when we started this series back in June, we're seeing a noticeable increase in the use of broadband in enterprise networks. And today, we continue that discussion with some insights into the evolving commercial model and the optimal supplier mix. So, Keith, what are your thoughts regarding these key elements of a deal for broadband services?
Well, good morning, Tony. It's great to be back on Staying Connected. And as a fellow resident of Atlanta, Georgia, I know you're glad it's September and cooler temperatures are on the way. First and foremost, where broadband is concerned, the market is moving away from contract structures that include multiple year terms with significant overall revenue commitments. Some market-leading deals for broadband now may include nothing more than a 12-month minimum circuit term. This does not mean that you can't obtain protection from price increases for a longer period of time, such as 3 years, but you should not lock in any of your sites for more than 1 year. And since we typically find that multiple suppliers provide the best overall coverage and the lowest overall costs, shorter terms allow you to maintain a competitive tension among your portfolio of suppliers. Such supplier flexibility is required to ensure the best service delivery at the most competitive price for any given site. Speaking of flexibility, don't lose sight of the overall deal structure being proposed by a supplier. For example, while you may get compliance with your 12-month minimum circuit term and no revenue commitment, suppliers will attempt to lock you in with site and/or circuit volume commitments over the term of the deal. In these situations, the enterprise can consider an overall revenue commitment if it's appropriately scaled to maintain flexibility.
Interesting. By maintaining short circuit terms, it sounds like you're managing to a best-in-breed solution. I get the point about how commitments and more specifically vendor lock-in can come in many forms.
Yes, exactly that. The challenge in sourcing broadband and internet services is identifying the optimal balance between the number of suppliers to manage and the available cost savings. A flexible structure among multiple suppliers enables you to manage and allocate services for optimal initial cost and then potentially continual cost improvements over time, maintaining significant leverage and competitive tension between your suppliers. Also, an important reminder, be sure to define your service requirements and your preferred design before you approach the marketplace. Keeping the supplier account teams focused while being as prescriptive as possible is key.
So, Keith, the implication seems to be that there's more than one supplier. Now, I know with MPLS services, at least within a particular region of the globe, such as North America or EMEA, our clients usually have a single provider, maybe two if there are diversity requirements. This seems to be counter to that approach.
That's correct, Tony. We find that within any particular global region, the optimal mix is usually between 3 to 5 suppliers. This allows you to select the best possible service at the lowest possible price for any site. Of course, there are usually diminishing returns when you get beyond 5 suppliers, but the total cost differential between one supplier and say 3 or 4 is usually very substantial. Of course, you've got to weigh this against the practical reality of managing multiple suppliers, but you should at least do the analysis so that you can make an informed decision.
So, Keith, this brings to mind another question. I'm hearing a lot lately about service aggregators. How do they fit into the picture?
Great question. The options here vary among the primary service providers, such as the big telcos and cable companies, think AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, to the pure aggregators such as Xperio, GTT, and Granite, and to some that act as hybrids and do both. For example, Comcast is able to provide native service in many places, but almost never to all sites for any large U.S. company. For sites where Comcast does not have native service, they can obtain services from their partners and act as an aggregator. It's important to note that aggregators provide service on a pure resale basis, though, so understanding who the actual underlying provider is critical, particularly if you have a requirement to maintain diversity at a site. Further, where a telco is providing an aggregation function, that service is also going to be provided on a pure resale basis. Of course, the examples I just mentioned have a U.S. focus, but the model applies to the entire globe. The players are just different. Finally, speaking of potential suppliers, it's a good idea to start with an assessment of your overall opportunity from the supplier's perspective. Is your opportunity largely greenfield, or do you already have incumbent suppliers? And if so, what's the current service mix? Are you seeking a wireline only service, or is fixed wireless access in the mix as either primary or backup? And if it is wireless, are you willing to consider some of the emerging providers of non-terrestrial network services, in addition to the more well-known wireless providers and solutions? The options are many. There's simply not enough time to do a deep dive into that today, but TC2 can help you come up with the appropriate list of possibilities for your RFP or sourcing event.
Very true. And my hunch is that as the aggregators grow and mature in this space, you may be able to leverage them for some of the cherry picking we mentioned before. If they're good at selecting the best option for a given site, you may be able to land with only 2 to 3 suppliers. The goal is to keep the competitive tension in play. And speaking of suppliers and competitive tension, that reminds me of some relevant marketplace activity that is directly related to this discussion we're having, Keith. Earlier this month, Verizon announced plans to acquire fiber optic internet provider Frontier Communications in an all-cash deal worth about $20 billion. Now, setting aside for a moment that Verizon originally spun off Frontier in 2010, this seems generally like a smart move on Verizon's part, as acquiring network assets versus costly and time-intensive build-out provides almost immediate access to an expanded network footprint, customers, and potential revenue. However, some analysts are saying that the move doesn't provide enough fiber and that Verizon's next target should or might even be Lumen. What do you think, Keith?
I tend to agree. A little ironic, but yes, it's a smart move. Verizon is somewhat unique in that, unlike AT&T, for example, Verizon has decided they will not propose aggregation solutions in a broadband deal. For wireline services, Verizon will bid broadband if their Fios product is available at your location. Otherwise, they simply no-bid the site. Verizon's acquisition of Frontier will definitely expand their broadband footprint overnight, while also strengthening their play on the fixed wireless front. I think we're going to see an increased acquisition activity as both traditional mobility and fiber providers scramble to piece together converged offerings for both the consumer and enterprise markets.
I agree, and thanks for a great discussion today, Keith. If you have questions or would like to learn more about the evolving commercial model for broadband services and how to leverage the use of broadband in your wide area network, please contact me, Keith, or any of our TC2 and LB3 colleagues by giving us a call or shooting us an email. You can also stay current by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.